out and made money on them.
Wow.
You know, sold the body.
It's
You know,
a slave
that
trade.
happens, and absolutely. You know, and it's nice when you have a prison where you can just put people of a certain nature.
Good evening, nlcTrans. You're on the air.
Hey, hello. How y'all doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. I'm sitting here listening to your show, and I don't mean to be like a criticizer of anyone, but does this man not realize you are not homosexuals? That you are just not yet the person that you were meant to be?
No, yes, he does. He is not. Yes, Bobby is not suggesting that we're homosexuals. We were talking about the prison system and the way members of the GLBT community are treated in there, and certainly that applies. There's probably a much larger population, I would assume, of being that I haven't.
It has a higher homosexual ratio.
Right.
And transgenders are really rare things to see in the prison.
Right.
And when you see it, particularly in Walpole, the two instances there, the individuals, I mean, you're intelligent, rational people. These weren't. You know, so what they portray is the image that prisoners and staff have of all transgenders. You know, which is bad, because that's not what you people are.
Right. Right.
You know, and there's a problem. They can't put them in population, so
Right.
they end up in segregation, which, you know, no matter how you call it or how you treat it, it's punitive in nature.
Sure.
You know, and when you spend too much time in a segregated environment, mentally, it's going to hurt you.
Okay. So, so they're at
And
a
then you're not getting treatment on top of it.
they're in a quandary though. So
Right.
put you in general population where maybe you'll get abused, or abuse you in solitary confinement with solitary confinement.
Yeah,
Right.
you're
So
caught
to-
between a rock and a hard place.
So to answer the question, yes. Obviously, you know that we're not homosexuals; we're transsexuals. But once you wind up in prison,
Prison hierarchy takes over.
it gets to be a bit different and scary.
Right. And,
Very scary.
and I understand that, but my thing is this, is that you're already post-op, so you wouldn't go to a male prison. You would go to a female prison.
Right.
Not in Massachusetts.
Depends on the state, I believe. That varies across the country.
Yeah.
I did not realize that.
And that just boggles my mind to consider. I mean, yes, I'm post-op, and to think that I could wind up in a male prison. I mean, in this state, I know in this state I would wind up in a female prison, but the idea that I could in another state, you say in Massachusetts,
That a post-operative
They
transsexual
wouldn't
would
put
wind
you
up.
into the male population,
right?
but they wouldn't put you in the female prison.
Well,
So you'd end up in a segregated environment.
Just going crazy.
keep in mind, you can
Yeah.
be post-op and not have your documentation changed. So on paper, they're not going to ship an on-paper male to a female prison.
Right.
Yeah, it's not going to happen.
God forbid.
And then it can cause problems, because in the female prison, you have dykes who will be very resentful of your presence.
Wow. I think the answer here is none of us should ever go to prison.
For
Well,
real.
and it
Right.
raises the interesting concern, like for the person in Massachusetts you were talking about. If you somehow, by a miracle, did get your operation, your sex reassignment while in prison, and were able to update your records, how do you go about asking the court to transfer you?
Yeah.
Oh, see, here's what causes a problem in Massachusetts.
You've been in a male prison, you had your
Your
surgery
sentence,
paperwork.
okay, listen, you're sentenced to the state prison. If you're not sentenced to the care and custody of the Attorney General of the state, you're not sentenced to the Department of Corrections. You're sentenced to Walpole State Prison. There's only one state prison. The rest are like MCIs.
Okay, but if you become post-op and are no longer a male in a male prison, they would have to transfer you to a female prison.
Not true. Not true.
Then it's against your rights.
It sounds like, it's rational. What you're saying is the most rational thing to do, but that isn't how Department of Corrections operate. They don't operate on being rational.
So that opens them to a civil suit because they are violating now this woman's right by making her stay in a facility with men.
Right.
Right.
And that's why
And then what happens, see, this is what happens, is when you push the envelope, right, they don't put the individual into a female prison. They put them into a segregation unit where they're by themselves, which is really punitive.
It is.
Right.
Okay, so in Massachusetts, should you get arrested already post-op, your paperwork says you're a female, do they still put you in the male prison?
You would end up again either transferred out of the state because it's a political issue, or you would end up in a segregation unit. If they put you into Framingham, they would put you into a segregation unit. They wouldn't put you in general population.
Framingham being a women's prison?
Yeah, which is the woman prison.
Well, I think we need to stay out of
So
Massachusetts.
wherever they put you, you'd be segregated.
But I think
Period.
that's part
Pretty
of the
much,
reason.
yeah. I mean, that's pretty much across the country. I mean, because it's a rare thing.
Right, right.
I mean, you don't see that many transgenders in prison, in DOCs, not to back them up or anything. They don't know what to do with the situation.
Right.
They don't know how to deal with it.
And you've got this disconnect.
And lockup is the easiest way to deal
You've got
with
this
it.
disconnect between what seems like the logical thing to do and what actually happens, and I think that's where a lot of what you've been working on with lobbying for reform in the prison system comes into play. Like,
Okay, but see,
this
we
should be-
we don't try to reform prisons. You can't reform prisons, right? What we talk about is abolition of prisons. They don't work. They're wrong in concept. They're wrong
It's
in
a
application.
correction facility.
Yeah,
What are
they
they
don't
correcting?
correct.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, 97% of the people in prison are coming to the street. They're coming to the street worse than they entered the prison.
Yeah.
And this is how the game's like.
That's scary.
I'm 67 years old. I spent over 2/3 of my life in some form of confinement from reform schools to state prisons. When I went to the reform school, I was 13 years old. I learned how to steal a car. I learned how to break the antenna off the car and make a zip gun. When I got into the state prisons, I learned how to pick locks. I learned how to crack safes. I learned how to circumvent burglar alarms.
Wow.
This is the nature of that beast.
Yeah.
So reforming the prison would be a better idea instead of leaving it the way it is.
Right.
But you can't reform it because prison's are not about corrections. Prison's about job security.
If you're going to punish somebody through the legal system, I think what you're suggesting is there needs to be another way to do it than to lock them up in a cell.
Listen, Massachusetts has a statute that mandates the Commissioner of Corrections rehabilitate prisoners. They don't do that. They do not have a vested interest in rehabilitating prisoners. It's like privatized prisons. If you were the superintendent of a privatized prison and came up with the best possible plan on the earth to rehabilitate prisoners and reduce recidivism rate, the shareholders would demand you be fired. How dare you get rid of the product?
Right.
Oh, so you're saying that they have a vested interest in continuing to house
Absolutely.
people.
Right.
Okay. We've got calls piling up here. Well, thank you for calling.
Hey, you have a really good night.
Thank you. You too.
And happy
Bye.
Halloween.
You too.
Good evening, nlcTrans. You're on the air.
I think that's still Devin.
Okay, we missed that one.
Oh,
Is this
can you hear
Devin?
me?
Yes.
Yeah, this is just me listening. What I
I'm
was
sorry.
gonna say,
Well,
I'm sorry.
we will sooner or later learn how to work the phone system.
okay, am I allowed to comment and stuff?
Yes.
Absolutely. Talk to
Oh,
us.
okay. What I was going to say is that solid confinement is actually for your own protection.
Right.
That there aren't problems within the community.
Right, but the idea that protective custody lands you in solitary confinement is the disconnect.
Right. Well,
They don't have any other way to protect you than to lock you up in solitary.
the byproduct of the solitary
Protective custody
confinement.
isn't protective. You got to understand that. Protective custody is not protective because it takes a human being and puts him in an abnormal environment
Right,
that
so I'm-
individual can't adapt to.
I think what's being suggested here is that the solitary confinement,